Well, when Jason Valdez of the Norteños gang decided to take a hostage, he posted a picture of her on his Facebook page. Cute hostage, huh? And at the time that the SWAT team was trying to break in from the front of the motel he was at and from the side, he, in the middle of a shootout, friended 15 people. And then his friends started posting on his wall, "Gunner in the bushes." They were telling him where the SWAT team members were and so forth. And just like a big budget movie, you know, the SWAT guys come rushing in from the, blast in from the front and the side. He's wounded, taken to hospital. The hostage is fine, but now the cops are thinking, what do we do about his friends who helped him out with those posts? And so I think this is a great example of how social networks have become ubiquitous and addictive. You can't even go to a meeting at IIT where people aren't, you know, on their Blackberries and doing things, and, you know, our classrooms are all wired, and so you constantly, as a professor, got to walk around to see if people are designing their wedding dress instead of listening to what you're doing, things like that. And it's easy to understand why people get so excited about them. You can stay in touch with friends, you can find out all sorts of information, but it's harder to anticipate what will happen to you once you get on Facebook or get on the web. So if I were to do something radical like move to a kibbutz in Israel or teach English in Japan or join the army, I'd have some sense of what I was getting into. I'd have seen a movie about it or know someone who'd done it. But social networks are very new, just since 2004, and once you're there, you don't really know what's going to happen to you, in part because places like Facebook changed the rules, and we'll talk a little bit about that. So figuring out what actually goes on social networks is really important. Facebook has 850 million members, and that would make it the third largest nation in the world. So it's, you know, only China and India have more citizens. And it is a bit like a nation because it has citizens, it has an economy, and now has its own currency. So if you play Mafia Wars or games like that, you now pay with Facebook currency. It has a system for resolving disputes. It has relationships with other institutions and other nations. So Mark Zuckerberg goes to the G8 meetings now, and the press covers it and says, you know, the presidents of European countries are more in awe of him than he is of them. So I got really interested, and I began to wonder if it was a nation, you know, what are its politics? Does it have a constitution? And more recently, you might have read about its economy because there's an IPO, a public offering for Facebook stock. So Facebook as a company is worth $100 billion. So you might think, well, what's its inventory? It's not widgets or gadgets. What it trades in is personal information, yours and mine. So how does it make its money? It makes 86% of its income, $3.2 billion a year, in ads. So it finds out information about you from what you've posted and so forth and delivers ads to you. But it's only the tip of the iceberg in this data aggregation. Google actually makes 10 times as much. So it makes $36 billion a year, and it makes 96% of its income selling your information to advertisers. And it knows a hell of a lot about you. It knows what your concerns are from your Gmail. So they actually scan Gmail. So if I say to a friend, I'm thinking of getting a divorce, it knows that I'm in that category. Or it knows what searches I've done for on the web. And it knows what videos I watch, and it knows my location. So I have a Droid phone. Even if I turn my GPS off, Google collects that information. And I was really taken by security expert Richard Power, who said, think about if the government had tried to get all that personal information about us, where we are at every moment, or the things we have on Facebook about our political beliefs, our sexual beliefs, you know, and so forth. They said if the government wanted it, it would take money, it would take lawyers, it might even take guns. And yet we give it up to Facebook and Google and so forth. And astonishingly, 93% of the time when the government asks Google for information about personally what you've searched for or things where you've been, Google turns it over. So in some ways, it's a conduit. And you know, as many of my friends who are here tonight know, you know, in my mysteries, the last one, I invented a date rape drug. Imagine the Google search I did. I was looking for different chemical formula, and one, I blew up the White House. And so if the cops were to get my Google searches, I'd be, you know, like taken away in handcuffs. So this collection of data is just ubiquitous. Google found a way to circumvent the Safari browser privacy protections. You might have seen the recent release of what apps get about you. So if you play Angry Birds, it knows your location. It knows all the phone calls you've made. Well, to play the game Angry Birds, it doesn't need that information about you, but there's this huge market in the collection of information. There's this one app I really think is kind of scary, but seems really minor when you first think about it. You get this app into Now. And the exciting thing is you watch TV, like if I were watching The Good Wife, it remotely activates my mic so it can tell I'm watching The Good Wife. It can tell whatever television show you're watching. And so then it puts me in a chat room. Well, what do you think? Is she going to sleep with Will or not? You know, about The Good Wife. And then it offers me things like, oh, don't you want to buy that power suit that Alicia's wearing on The Good Wife? So it's a way to get you into products, into chat groups. Well, people didn't realize that by remotely activating your mic, it also can collect information. Do you eat at home? Do you eat in a restaurant? Do you have sex with someone of the same sex or the opposite sex? So apps are getting an enormous amount of information. There's a huge market in that. So what happens with this information? Where does it all go? How is it used? So it's used for ads, and you know that. You know, you're Gmailing a friend and then an ad pops up, or you looked at shoes on a website and then 10 websites later and 4 days later you see those same shoes, you know, why don't you buy these shoes, and so forth. But sometimes it's not that innocent in a way. So Google admitted in 2010 that when young people on a suicide chat room would say, I'm thinking of committing suicide with X chemical, ads would pop up. Dial 1-800-NOW, buy 2 for 1, that chemical. So it's sort of, you know, or think about it if you're like a 13-year-old girl and you're feeling like you're 10 pounds heavy and you search for, you know, weight loss things, then everywhere you go, you know, you look up a movie time and it's like feeling fat, feeling fat, feeling fat, you know, so these things follow you around. So it's used for ads. It's used for research. You know, so this is kind of interesting. They're doing it on campuses. They give students a free iPhone if you agree to be part of a research study, which means you keep the mic on all the time and you keep the phone on you. And so what they're trying to do is figure out who influences you. Are it people that are your, you know, your professors or your roommates or the people you spend time with or that you write to? But they also are doing all this other research, including they learn by following the motions of people who had their iPhones in their pockets, who was going to get the flu before people realized they were getting the flu. So the researchers just adore this because it can, you know, tell them all sorts of new things, but in the meantime, it's really invading, you know, privacy in a way. And you may think that these ads, I mean, oh, it's fun, I get money off at a store, I find out where my favorite band is playing, but the information can be used not just to benefit you, but to discriminate against you. And I'm finding more and more people's online selves are becoming more important in a bunch of settings than their offline selves. And so what happens is data is aggregated about me. So there's a company, Axiom, that has 1,500 pieces of information on 96% of Americans. What, you know, medication you use, your social security number, and it's just collected that off the web. Nebuad, a data aggregator, this is what they did in California. They put their hardware on the internet service provider. So say you had Verizon or Comcast or whatever. They put their hardware on it. They copied every single thing people sent over the internet. So every email you sent, every web search you did, every time you filled in your credit card number. And they use it to make decisions about people. So one of the things that happened was they started using it to discriminate. Different companies have used it to discriminate. So this, you know, guy with his own business in Atlanta went on his honeymoon. He had a $10,000 credit card limit. he comes home to a letter from American Express that says, we've lowered it to $3,000. Now, he was a good credit risk. His dad had worked for the credit industry, so he paid off his bill every month. He made a lot of money. But what they said was, we're lowering your credit limit, not because of anything you did, but because in the aggregate, you shopped at a place where people tend to renege on their credit cards. So that means if I have talked about a divorce lawyer in an email, or if I've gone on a website for old guitars and it turns out that divorcing people are less likely to pay off their credit card bill, like it's true, or you know, garage band members are less likely to pay off their credit card bill. Then if I go to a credit card site, I get a less good deal, or they cut my credit down. Or if I've searched for something like hand tremors or medical symptoms, and I go to a life insurance site, I get, you know, I'm sometimes refused life insurance, or it's lowered. So you have this whole thing going on where you don't even know that what you're doing on the web can come back to haunt you. And so it turns out you're thought to be a less good credit risk if you bought things on Walmart as opposed to looking at a ski site. So now I'm telling you how to game the system, you know, look at all these wealthy sites, read the New Yorker, you know, so forth to get better credit. Now sometimes it's what you post yourself that comes back to haunt you because colleges and employers now really do search your social network pages. 75% of companies require now their HR directors to look at your online profile before offering you a job. And so, and a lot of people have been fired based on what they've posted. So I think of poor Ashley Payne. She's a high school teacher in Georgia. She went on her summer vacation to Ireland. She posted 700 pictures. She lost her job because of these pictures of drinking her with beer in her hand at a Guinness factory. I mean, it's the most innocent of things. You know, she's an adult. She can drink beer, you know. She hadn't friended any of her students or their parents, and yet 1/3 of employers say they will, that they've refused to hire people who had a drink in their hand on their Facebook pages. And then there are things, I mean, you might say, okay, now I know I don't post any drunken hot tub photos or drinking photos or, you know, pictures of myself in, you know, French maid costumes or whatever on my Facebook page. But sometimes even like seemingly innocent things you post can come back to haunt you. So there was a New York case. A woman was injured at work. She needed 3 spinal surgeries as a result. She had a lot of pins put in her neck. She sues, and the judge actually said, since she was smiling in her MySpace photo, she couldn't have been injured. So the judge didn't even say, was that photo taken before the accident and so forth. So I'm seeing tons of cases where, you know, your digital doppelganger seems to count more than what you actually do or how you are in real life. And so, because I'm a lawyer, you know, I mean, I suppose I could have maybe tried to solve this in a more of an engineering way. So some people they're saying, okay, what we're going to do is we're going to build in digital tags to our photos that they self-destruct after 2 years and stuff. So if I party on in college, it doesn't harm me when I'm on the job market. But since I'm a lawyer, I said we need a constitution for the web. We need our rights from off the web to apply on the web. You know, so, and I think what social networks doing are turning the social contract upside down. They're making what we think of as private, what we post to our friends, public. And on the other hand, they're making private the general public functions. So what they're doing is crowdsourcing investigations. So any of us in this room can become a Texas virtual deputy. There are cameras put up all along the border in Texas, and from all over the world, guys in a pub in Australia, this one woman who's pregnant in New York, they go on their the cameras on the web to report people who are doing, they think, illegal border crossings. And you've got one woman who says, I watch eagles and illegals. That's a fun thing to do. But the reporting comes in really racist language, isn't necessarily about people who are there illegally, and so forth. And it doesn't have any of the restraints that the cops themselves have to comport with. And the same social network, Blue Servo, is now putting it in suburban neighborhoods. so you can tattle on your, the people who live down the block. And what's interesting is, there are such things, legal protections about prosecutorial discretion. Law enforcement isn't supposed to single out certain people. But think about in the neighborhood setting. Maybe 4 teenagers down the block come home drunk from high school. But if I'm, pissed at some dispute about my fence with one family, I might report, one of them. Or if I think my neighbor, yanked her kid the 2-year-old out of the car too much, I could report her for child abuse and so forth. And so we're seeing that going on all over. We have, and people from all over the country are looking at other people's Facebook pages to see if they're treating an animal or their child, in those people's minds, badly. So in my book, I actually say that my sister, when my son was really little, unbuttoned his onesie and put like an Elvis gold chain and a little, capped bottle of Jack Daniels in his stroller. Like imagine if that went on Facebook now. I would be, the Department of Children and Family Services would be at my doorstep. So we have these things going on. So my social network constitution, what would it have? It would have a right to connect. So think about it. We have freedom of the press, in real life, and this would be similar. And you might have seen all the stuff around the Arab Spring. So Twitter and Facebook and YouTube were used to spark really the revolution in Egypt. And in fact, afterward, when the president stepped down in Egypt, after the revolution in other parts of in Tunisia and other places, there were all these thank you notes to Facebook because, in fact, social networks had really helped, start this revolution. And in fact, one couple who had a little girl, the week after the president stepped down in Egypt, named their baby Facebook. So we've seen how social and democratic things can be enhanced by social networks. But at the same time, I think you probably remember that what did the government of Egypt do? It called up the 5 internet service providers in Egypt and said, shut down. So all of a sudden, you couldn't, politically gather. You couldn't tell people where you're going to be. You couldn't communicate. They kept open the one that had the Egyptian Stock Exchange going, and ultimately those shut that down. So Libya did the same thing, except they didn't shut it down. They left it open, but made the bandwidth be a trickle, so no one could get through. It looked like you could get in touch with people in Libya, but you couldn't. And you may think, well, that would never happen here. We're, all about free speech and so forth, but there's a pending bill in Congress that would create a director of cyberspace who would, in fact, have the right to, slow down the internet. And Homeland Security is doing a project where they want to put digital tags on what you write. So if all of a sudden they don't like what Lori Andrews is saying about the government, or if they don't want you to hear from a whole other country, like Tunisia, they can shut off those selective things. So I'd have a right to connect. Now, another right I'd have is freedom of association. And you may think that, man, if Facebook does anything, it helps us associate. There's the I Love Justin Bieber website, there's the Facebook page, there's the Free the West Memphis 3 website. There are all sorts of, there's the Class of 2002 Reunion Committee website, Facebook page. And so you might think it does that very well. But one of the problems is that in the legal world, the freedom to associate also has with it a right to keep your associations private. And this grew out of a Supreme Court case in the 60s where the government of Alabama wanted the NAACP to give the government of Alabama its member list. And the Supreme Court said, no, no good can come of this. There are things like loss of employment, threats, physical violence, economic reprisal that can come sometimes by just letting people know who your associations are. Yet social networks don't abide by that. So when people joined Facebook in 2004, the terms of service actually said, we will never give your information to anyone unless you designate it. We will keep your friends private. You have total control. And then in 2009, Facebook decided it would make your friends' pictures public. So all of a sudden they knew about Chippy and others who were in my life, you know, because their pictures and names came up on my Facebook page. But there were a bunch of people in the US who were critics of the Iranian government. And some of them had friends and family members in Tehran. And so those pictures came up. And then their friends and relatives got arrested, got beat up, and so forth because, you know, they could be found by another, another government. So I think we have to be concerned about control over information about us. I think there's also a need to protect freedom of expression. There have been kids who have been suspended from school for posting criticism about their high school teacher or their high school coach. I mean, one case I was particularly troubled by, a kid with a 3.94 grade point average, a really good student, co-captain of the basketball team. In English class, they asked him to write a mock obituary of himself. That was the assignment, so he did that, and it was fun. You know, you could think about all these things you ought to be remembered by. So he went home and he started doing it for classmates, and they all thought it was fun and great and cool until someone said, "Oh my God, this is like Columbine," and boom, he's knocked out of school, he's suspended. And they, you know, and the way it works, there's like an automatic grade point drop, so you go from an A to a B if you're out for a certain number of days. So, you know, all of a sudden, I mean, they've taught him to do that. They encourage this sort of writing, and now his, you know, chances of college and so forth get ruined. I mean, ultimately in that case, the court decided in his favor, but you lose a couple years worth of your life as a high school student if you are kicked out and then ultimately prevail in court. So I think we do need a right to freely express ourselves. Now, what should the limits of that be? I mean, courts have played around with that idea. 30 years ago, Ozzy Osbourne recorded the song Suicide Solution. It says, "Suicide's the only way out, get the gun and try it, shoot, shoot, shoot." So a 19-year-old who was listening to that for 5 hours straight did. He committed suicide, he shot himself. His parents sued, and the court said, you know, this is protected speech. The lyrics didn't have a call to action for a particular person to do a particular thing, so it's protected. Well, how might that go over in the online world? So this is Nadia Kajouji. She was a freshman in college in Canada, and she had been a really good student in high school, and but she had some problems when she got to college. She had sex with her boyfriend, the condom broke, she got pregnant, he dumped her, she lost the baby, all these horrible, horrible things that she was dealing with. And so she sought companionship online and advice. And so this young female nurse, Cami, started conversing with her, instant messaging, and the nurse said, you know, there's really nothing that can be done, you should kill yourself. And why don't we both kill ourselves in front of our webcams by hanging ourselves? And even told Nadia, go to Home Depot, buy this length of yellow thing, and I'm a nurse, and I know this is the safest way, and you won't feel anything at all, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Well, it turned out that Cami was actually this 50-some-year-old guy in Minnesota who got his sick kicks out of getting people to commit suicide, you know, hopefully in front of their webcams where he could see it. He never was going to keep up his end of the pact. And so, you know, it was really problematic, you know, to think, what do you do? At least 2 people did commit suicide, and a bunch of other people have been lost, no longer on the chat rooms who he was chatting with, and so may have committed suicide too. In Canada, they said they couldn't prosecute him because you can't prosecute for aiding and abetting suicide unless you like actually push someone over a bridge or, you know, put the pills in their mouth. But a judge in Minnesota said, listen, this was lethal advocacy. It wasn't something protected by the First Amendment. And so I think even if we have freedom of expression, we need a rule like we have offline that you don't protect speech that causes a clear, imminent harm. So unlike the Ozzy Osbourne case, he was talking to a vulnerable individual and urging her on. But that case is being appealed on First Amendment grounds right now. I also think a right to privacy is really important. And so unlike Vegas, what happens on Facebook doesn't stay on Facebook, as we've talked about. And in Chicago, a partner at a law firm took all the new young associates who had just started work, their first day of work, took them in the conference room and had put up on the walls the stupidest pictures of each of them that he could find on the web. And he said, this is your future. So, you know, do we really want, you know, everybody in the world to have access to our personal information? There's a website called Patients Like Me, which is where people talk about their health problems. And they talk about, and they share information about what treatments worked or didn't work, or health, you know, natural health remedies. And there are many, many patients who are on this. Well, what happened was one of the data aggregators that I've talked about, Nielsen, posed as a patient, used a bot to collect everybody's personal information. And so the whole value of this social network was lost because people then stopped posting. You know, so people who had been separated, you know, by distance, so there weren't that many people with their sort of disease, then, you know, had the many, many pages of information with their moods and so forth put in, you know, taken from them. So I would say, if you know, I were doing the laws for this, that your social network pages should be considered private, like your home. You know, if I had 20 people in my home, 20 friends, my boss couldn't just drop over without an invitation. The cops couldn't come in without a warrant. But yet employers and law enforcement think that if you have 20 friends on your social network page, they're entitled to it. Now we're seeing some change in that. Maryland just this week passed a law that said your employer can't ask for your private password to Facebook, because many employers were either doing that or were doing something called shoulder surfing, where they'd make you sign on to your private and look over your shoulder. Privacy is important to me. Privacy is a place as well. Some amazing things have happened with the technologies being able to tell your location. So in Pennsylvania, in this wealthy school, they gave all the students, high school students, laptops. And they didn't tell them or their parents that the computer staff at the high school could remotely activate the webcams. And so what happened was the IT staff at the high school took tens and thousands of pictures through the webcams. This is but think about it. I mean, I travel in hotels. I have my coming out of the shower, whatever. I mean, I have my laptop open all the time with the webcam there, as high school students do. You know, so you have, half-dressed, high school girls and so forth, whose pictures are being taken by people at the school who are emailing each other. God, this is just like a little soap opera. The idea of having the ability to remotely activate webcams had come from, well, if a laptop is stolen, maybe we could find out who's got it. But they were using it on the students. And so this is Blake Robbins. He found out about it because one day the assistant principal called him in and showed him a picture of himself in his bedroom and said, "You're using illegal drugs," because he had these oval-shaped things in his hand. And he looked at it, freaked out that she had a picture of him in his bedroom, and said, "Those are Mike and Ike's candies." So I think we need protection from our gadgets in terms of privacy of place. We need to be told what the technologies do. Like, here's a radio personality and host of a TV show post a picture of his car on Twitter. He didn't know that in these digital photos taken with iPhones, there's a geolocation tag where, if you're savvy computer-wise, you can tell where the photo was taken. So what's happening is we're getting these criminals who are cyber casing. I post my big diamond engagement ring, a picture of it, but it also, if it's taken in my house, the digital file tells the location of my house. I get robbed. Or even in a simpler version of it, a New Hampshire gang of thieves robbed 50 houses by just looking at who posted they were on vacation on Facebook. And now there's even a computer program that can, tell you that. So lots of things going on with location. In some situations, women in the workplace, male rivals have posted Google Maps to their house with saying they had a rape fantasy. One 40-year-old woman got pissed at a 17-year-old, the daughter of her new boyfriend, and posted the 17-year-old's picture, phone number, and where she worked in the casual sex encounters section of Craigslist, as if she were asking for, casual sex. And so men started, sexting her and showing up at the Sonic restaurant where she worked. And so this information about place can be really important. The Supreme Court very recently decided the Jones case, and that was a case about whether the cops could, without a warrant, put a tracking device, a GPS device, on someone's car for 28 days in a row and follow that person all over. And the argument was, well, cops have a right to, watch cars that are on the street. That's public information, so what's the beef about this? But there seems to be something like much more troubling about knowing everywhere you go for a long period of time. And in an astonishing decision, really, the Supreme Court 9-0 protected privacy. The Supreme Court can hardly agree about anything. And they said, think of all the information you get from GPS information. You know whether the person's going to a church or synagogue or AIDS treatment center or, speaking to a competitor of their current employer. And so I'm seeing some action in this area of privacy of place. And I don't know if you follow the thing going on in the past week with Girls Around Me. I'm sure half of you are on this when you're in bars. It's an app that tells you what girls are around you and in neighboring bars and bars down the street. And so what it is you see the little picture from their Facebook page, and if they've checked in or a friend has checked them in on Foursquare or Facebook or something like that. And then if you want, you tap and you can get all the information about the women on this. Well, there was really nothing, no law that prevented this, but it was creepy, according to people, not a legal standard, and creepy enough that the Apple Store stopped selling it. But it's no different than what these data aggregators are doing now, except we saw the public face of it. Another thing that I'm seeing is that the right to a fair trial is being turned on its head through these mechanisms of social networks. So you got people now with their iPhones who are sitting on juries who are Googling facts of the case. They're looking at the scene from Google Maps. They are going on the MySpace page of the witness and telling each other, well, she's not very credible because look, she was wearing these, crazy Halloween costume here. And then one juror even posted the facts of the case on her Facebook page. I said, I can't decide. I'm sitting on this criminal case, fry the guy or not. Had her friends vote like, not like, up, down on the future. And so that goes against the idea that jurors are supposed to themselves decide. They're supposed to only listen to information that's presented because you don't know if the other side doesn't have a chance to cross-examine whether something's true or not. And in fact, now there's getting to be this huge battle going on. When Martha Stewart got indicted, the first thing she did was put up a great website. So jurors and others that was fed every day. On the other hand, when Phil Spector got indicted, people started posting falsely bad things about him. So if jurors looked, they would get this information. There are also ways in which pictures are being used to enhance sentences. So in Los Angeles, you can get an extra 5 years on your sentence if you're wearing gang colors in your Facebook page. So I looked up the LAPD. What's gang colors? Plaid. Plaid. So you're going down. I hate to tell you. So think any hipster. Think all black. New York art opening. So it's very, very interesting to see how this is being used. So what's happened now is like defense lawyers have started getting annoyed enough that they've turned the tables. And they're getting access to the MySpace and Facebook pages of cops. Well, if you ever have a group that is going to post stuff that might come back to haunt them. So you have cops posting their job is human waste disposal, or that they love the film Training Day, or various films that cross the line in terms of what people do. So sadly, in one case, a guy had been arrested for violating his probation by having a weapon. But he subpoenaed the cop's MySpace page, where his emoticon of the cop was set to devious. And that was used and actually convinced the jury that he'd planted the gun, which may not have been so at all, but so now everybody's having an issue. I mean, there is even this one case where this 50-some-year-old judge friended the hot, sexy female defendant in his courtroom and told her how to plead on Facebook. I mean, I think that this whole area, everybody wants to be the star of their own movie, and so it's getting a little wild. And then you've got jurors tweeting, "Oh, don't buy Stone. It's bad mojo. They'll probably cease to exist now that their wallet's 11 million lighter." Or Reuters did a study of tweets about jurors, and they occur like one tweet every 3 minutes from a juror. And some have said, like a couple people, when they were in the jury pool, they hadn't even been picked, were tweeting, "He's guilty, I can tell." So now then, Reuters, who was just doing this as kind of a study, had this ethical dilemma. Do we call those judges up, especially when they were sitting jurors saying, "I've made up my mind," or "I'm never going to vote for him because like the defense attorney is so much cuter than the prosecutor," or things like this, And so they actually did get in touch with some of the judges, and the jurors got bounced, or it was a mistrial, and so forth. It's really changing our lives in fundamental ways. So what are the protections that are going on? First of all, a lot of times Facebook or Google just says, "Well, you've agreed to this." I don't know if you know, when you agree to be on Facebook, you give them a license to use your image and post, and so they have a right to, say, run ads with my picture in it, or so forth. And so the terms of service thing is interesting. So GameStation did a terms of service that said, by agreeing to our terms of service of this particular game, you give us your immortal soul. And 88% of people gave up their immortal soul, which probably means they didn't read it. So should we be holding people to these contracts that they don't read, or that are really contracts of adhesion? So I gave a talk at Penn Law School recently. They put me up in this nice hotel on the campus. I went looking, and I'd flown in late the night before. I had dinner, I had lunch, because I teach during the lunch hour, and I'm like starving the next morning. I look around for a room service menu. They have none. They have an iPad. And to get to the room service menu, you have to agree to the terms of service, which are like pages and pages, and I'm like, I don't want to agree to them turning on the webcam in my hotel room, who knows what you're agreeing to. So I'm like looking around the bottom of my purse, finally found Raisinets, So sometimes you're, coerced into these things, and we wouldn't let a company say, "Oh yeah, you can use our product, but you have to give up, one of your other constitutional rights, like the right to reproduce or the right to vote." And so should they really be able to say you have to give up your right to privacy? The Digital Advertising Alliance realizing that people were getting upset about some of these things, said, "Well, we're going to put a do not track button." But it really doesn't. It's so silly. It makes you think it's like the do not call list. You're on a list, they won't do this. But it still tracks you, and it serves you certain ads, but it tries not to freak you out, by like secretly taking a line from my email to my sister and then using that in an ad. So it's still collecting this information, selling this information. So that's not very helpful to me. And then President Obama came out and said we need an online Bill of Rights. And I thought, hey, well, that's pretty cool. I've been saying that a while. Glad somebody's listening. What happens is he really wants the industry to self-regulate. And he's saying that we should be able to opt out of the collection of personal data about us. So let's think about that. Personal data is my name, my computer IP address, something that really, really identifies me. But you don't need to have my name or my computer address to be able to link a bunch of problematic stuff, like my web searches for health conditions, with me. I mean, who else, starts all her maps from my address on Dickens Street in Chicago? Who else is looking at whether, there's any hope for this book in the rankings on Amazon.com? You get 2 pieces of information, you can tell it's me, and then you can link all the web searches and the emails and so forth to that. And I think of that because AOL a few years ago did this amazing thing, and they said, we want researchers to be able to use data about people's AOL searches, and we're going to just anonymize it, send it out without a name. So here's this person who searched for numb fingers, a ton of things. So, how many searches do you do over a couple year period? You do hundreds, thousands, tens of thousands. But, if she's looking for landscapers in a small town in Georgia, and if she's on a genealogical site looking for people with the last name of Arnold, even though the AOL didn't put her name on it, it took the New York Times like 2 minutes to track her down. And I saw the same thing with genetic information when I was working in that area. The National Institutes of Health said, we're going to give money to researchers on genetics to sequence people's genome. But as a condition of getting this money, you're going to put people's genomes on the web with an annotation. So there might be the ATCG series of what your genes are, but annotate it. Like this person's predisposed to depression or predisposed to breast cancer or predisposed to arrhythmia, but we're not going to put their name so they'll be safe. Well, didn't anybody at NIH ever watch CSI? This is a unique identifier. All you have to do is do a swab of my water bottle for $189. You can get my sequence and then run it against all these genetic codes that are up and figure out who I am. And so what happened was this kid of an anonymous sperm donor did pay $189 and ran his DNA code against DNA in a genealogical database and identified his donor, without, having had names attached. And so NIH, got a little smarter and said that, no, we should stop posting these things. And I think that it shows how even something that seems to be anonymous can be tracked back to individuals. So part of what I've done in my project was to think about what rights we need, and I also looked at every technology that previously had raised privacy questions. So back in the 1880s when the first portable camera came out, people thought privacy was going to be dead. And if you read the newspaper articles from that time, they talked about it as the Kodak fiend. And they said things that sound exactly like getting tagged in a photo. It can catch you in an ugly, uncouth position in line at the post office, all of this. And so whether it was the portable camera or genetic technologies or forensic technologies, initially they violated privacy. It was a Wild West, but ultimately courts reined them in and protected people's privacy. So I think that will happen here too, and I'm just trying to help it along. So thanks so much.